I was watching with Laura and Rosalita. She said, "Is this the longest version of Rosalita?" I was sad enough to check. No, it's not. There is a
Yeah.
17.5 minute version I've got. But I think that's him and Clarence camping it up is always a great delight.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a crossover episode. It's Music Talks meets Set Listing Bruce. That's right. It's the month-ish. It's been a couple of months, but where Terry Smith and I get together and talk about releases from Mr. Springsteen. Terry, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Jesse, and it's lovely to be here as always. And Music Talks meets Set Listing Bruce is like should be a superhero movie, really, shouldn't it?
It should be. It is. It's very nice. Yes. So we have not recorded in a couple of months, just for various reasons. One, I don't think anything of the latest releases was something that I felt I didn't have anything particular, anything interesting to share. I would like, oh yeah, it was good, but
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anything over the past couple of months that you've seen that you did want to share.
No, I'm with you. I mean, I still get them and listen to them and enjoy them, but nothing special. Whereas, obviously, what we're going to talk about today was at last.
Yeah, it was really funny. We're going to talk the official No Nukes release of the kind of 90-minute set that and we're going to talk a little bit more details, but it was funny. I'm listening to it before I watched it, and I immediately jumped on my phone and went to Gmail and I said, "Hey Terry, any chance you want to talk about this?" And like almost immediately, and you have to understand there's a time difference between Terry and I. And he's like, "I was thinking the same thing."
Absolutely the same thing.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, so for those of you who may not know, and I don't, if you are, I don't know why you're listening to this podcast. Back in the late 70s, there was a movement to stop nuclear power. By the way, Penn Jillette says global warming is Jackson Browne and Bruce Springsteen's fault. That if they had not fought against nuclear power, we might have more nuclear plants and global warming would not be a thing. I don't think that's exactly true, but I do understand his point. But there was a film, but Bruce did not, because it was a lot of great artists, Tom Petty, Jackson Browne, Bonnie Raitt. Bruce and the E Street Band only made a couple of songs on both the album and the film. And we've always enjoyed that, right? It's a good thought. But one of the surprises that Bruce said he had at the beginning of the year is Tom Zemini, who is the official, I guess, Bruce Springsteen, videographer, or at least his partner in all things films, took the raw footage and put together a concert film. I'll start with you. What was your thoughts when you heard about this happening, and then after seeing it?
Well, let's take those in reverse. So, first of all, when I heard about it happening, I just said it was like finally, and I think one of the interesting things for me in this discussion, Jesse, is, and you've talked about it before, that in relative terms, you certainly came to Bruce later than this period. So I'm fascinated to hear, what your views of it are. But of course, this was pre my time as well. I didn't get to see him until another 20 months after this. And you have to remember, this was the 70s. So, when this concert took place, I had seen one clip of Bruce, which is him doing Rosalita. That famous clip where the girls are storming the stage and everything, that had been shown on the Old Grey Whistle Test in 1977, I think, in the UK. And that was literally the only thing anyone had ever seen in the UK of him, unless you made the concerts in 75, which I didn't. So therefore, and you continued to read about, the Darkness tour and what a genius this guy was live. So the fact that there was the No Nukes, both the album and the film, just to see was so exciting. But then to see the whole thing, and, I'll put my comments in the context of, I'm really glad they released it, and I think it's great. But it's been interesting listening to or reading and listening to some sort of reviews. And I think it was the Times in the UK, they described it as the performance of his career. And I'm like, I'm not sure about that. So, I guess my summary for this would be, I think it's a great 90 minutes. I think it's a great watch. You can certainly see that this is a bunch of people who've been cooped up in a studio for about 7 or 8 months.
Yes.
I mean, they did play things faster in the 70s, but God, this is, particularly night one, you can see the clips from there. I mean, it is really frenetic. Bruce body language and everything, there's like twitching, he's almost like he's electricity going off. So I think, they seem to be as excited to be there as the audience almost. I do think it's interesting to compare, late 70s audiences to what we've seen, in latter years of, there's no touching. Have you noticed?
Yeah.
They'll just stand there and look. But, I guess the summary I got to, and then we'll go into some of the details, is that if somebody said to me, okay, why is Springsteen such an exciting performer? I think this would be a great DVD to show them. If they ask the question, why do you go and see 48 Bruce concerts? Why is the concert experience so different, so special? I would absolutely show them Barcelona or Hyde Park, because, at the end of the day, the strange thing about this is it's a complete one-off. He doesn't do 90-minute shows.
Yes.
It is a charity event. It's you'll see the clock ticking in the corner. It's at the end of 6 or 7 hours.
Yes.
You've got the celebrity sing-along sort of at the end. So I love it. I think there are some great performances in there. I do think, whilst it's not a show, it does have that Springsteen arc. You start with Darkness. He goes into the river. That's probably where, and then you're into Sherry Darling and Let's Have a Party, Thunder Road Jungle Land, a brilliant Rosalita from Born to Run, and then Let's Do the Covers bit. So, I love it. I think there's great stuff in there, but I do think, I'm glad it's been added to the catalogue, but I don't subscribe to, the performance of his career. And I guess the final thing I will say is, I also think this is quite, it's a transitional moment, because I think about the band I saw 20 months later, and actually they were more polished than, and I'm not saying that's a good thing, but they were more polished than what you see in here.
Yeah, lot to unpack, and I hope I have mental notes. I forgot to write down things, so
I have to write down these days,
yes.
Jesse. It's a function of being 64.
One of the things that, first off, I have a little bit of that bias too. They'll say, and this was the E Street Band at their heights, and I do think that some classic fans, let's use a kind word, tend to over romanticize that, the Darkness tour and that time frame, right? One, I loved it. I loved it all. I loved the energy, but one thing thought is, the band seems a little light, because
Yes.
I had come from the age where we had little Steven and Niels and Patty and Susie, so when you look at this classic band, you're like, I mentally, I know they're not missing members, but I'm like, when I always think of the E Street Band, and in fact, I make that joke where after High Hopes and Wrecking Ball, where they had the orchestra kind of, all the horn
Yeah.
section, you're like, oh, for the River, it was the pared down band, and that was still what, 8 or 9 people, right? Like,
Yeah.
so it did strike that. Little Steven has long hair and he doesn't have a scarf on. He's got a cap.
I mean, I do love Bruce's "I'm 30, life is
Yes.
at an end."
Yes. And so the other point I wanted to make, and we're going to get into some details, but every once in a while, and it's not many, but you do hear a few people, oh, now that Bruce is over 70, are we going to get what we want? And I just can't see him doing 3.5, 4-hour shows anymore. Hey, if he can do a 90-minute show with this kind of energy,
Absolutely.
I'm okay. Take my money.
Yep.
I'm okay with it.
No, I'm he does, I think we've talked about this before.
Yeah.
He does what he used to do, and he did in these days, is
Yes.
that, you do 2 sets and you
Yeah.
take a break in the middle.
Yeah.
I must tell you the story. I saw
Yeah.
David Crosby just before I left Seattle.
Yeah.
And they did a first set of about an hour and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And then they did, and I always go back to Four-Way Street. We're going to take a little break and we'll be right back.
Yeah.
And they take their break. Now, the first thing is that I was bringing down the age of the audience.
Okay.
So it was quite, and he hadn't started till like 8:45 or something. So they've done the first set, and we're now past, and you can see a number of members of the audience of, it's getting a bit late.
Yes.
But they came back 20 minutes later, and he just walked to the man. He said, we've just been laughing. He said, in the old days, we used to go off for 20 minutes. And he said, I'll just say we used to do interesting things. He said, I've just had a kale salad. That's what changes when you're 70.
When Lynn and I went and saw a few months ago the Eagles Hotel California, 3 years after I bought the ticket, it feels like. Yep. And they did they had the full band, and with Vince Gill and Glenn Fry's son alternating between what Glenn would sing lead on. And they did all of Hotel California. Then they took a break and then came back and did kind of their, as Don Henley says, every song we know. They did a nice greatest hits thing. And so it ended up being a whole 3 hours with about a 15 or 20-minute break in there. And I'm like, I felt, it was great. They played everything I wanted to hear, and it was a lot of fun. So yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, well, also the thing, Bruce, in that format, Bruce could easily stick in half an hour's acoustic set as well.
Yes.
So, he can still do what will be a long evening, but without, I think even in 1979, in fairness, the energy that is in this show, I think 3.5 hours might have been a bit pushing it. But I also think
so.
You're spot on about the band. I mean, I guess it's why I go back to this, the performance of his career or the band playing at their peak. And it's like, no, you want to hear this band, in my view, at the musical peak in terms of playing. And it was the River Tour in 2016.
Yeah, I think so.
Immaculate.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean, when you think about it, I mean, they had, we had Little Steven and Niels and Susie and Patty, because the kids were old enough now that she could be at every show. And yes, we missed both Danny and Clarence, but we Charlie and Jake were filling in admirably. And so I think for sentimental reasons, you certainly would miss Clarence and Danny, but there was a joy and energy on those shows that you and I have talked about in the past. Like, we don't know how often we're going to get to do this. We may not get to do this too many more times. So we're going to leave it on everything we have out there, every show.
Yeah. And fingers crossed that we do get a tour next year.
Yes.
Boy, is that going to be amplified.
Yeah, I really do think so. I think there will be a joy. There is a lot of talk. You mentioned that they had been recording, so this was unusual for them. They normally don't do festivals. Bruce has said that they normally do not take breaks from recording, but this was a cause that he thought was a good cause.
Well, here's the thing on the recording, Jesse.
Yeah.
If you look at it, so they'd actually, at this point, thought they'd finished the album.
Oh, yeah, I guess they had.
Because, so if you go back to, he submitted what was going to be called the Ties. So he submitted the single album.
Yes.
Like a week after these concerts.
I had not put the timing together.
So, and this is one of the things I love about the man is that he's so perverse because, you know, I mean, in those sessions, I was looking yesterday, just if you look at the River box set, just what's released, then you've obviously got the original album, you've got the single album, Ties That Bind, you've then got the 22 outtakes that didn't quite make it. And he goes to a charity event. He plays 2 songs from his yet to be released album. And one of them, Sherry Darling, actually wasn't planned to be on the album.
Yes, yes.
And, you know, then he withdrew that album and went right back into the studio for another 6 months. And that's when The River came out. But yeah, they, so I think that's what you're seeing is that energy of, God, we've been cooped up in a studio, but you also wonder whether maybe a bit of frustration of still not quite right.
Yeah.
Still not quite right.
The other thing I thought was interesting is if you ignore the covers, you know, the shortest song's Born to Run.
Yeah.
You know, and almost everything else. I mean, Thunder Road's only 5.5 minutes, but almost every other song is 6 to 10 minutes.
You're right.
I mean, they are long songs, and there is a lot of, you know, antics on stage. They are having fun. They are giving back and forth with each other. You know, him and Clarence, him and Steven. It is. The other thing I thought is you don't have wireless amps anymore at this point, right? You see,
by the way,
Bruce,
you realize it is, and Laura, I'll mention Laura twice.
Yeah.
She pointed that is Kevin.
Yes.
So, you know, he's been around for a long time, but yeah, there's that
been a long time.
They run to the back and Kevin's trying to get his lead back in.
Yes, exactly. So I definitely agree. I believe this is not only an important historical document and historical kind of timepiece, but it's a fun 30-minute film. This won't happen, though I want it to really bad. We have at my job, our owner just bought a new building, and it has a wonderful, I don't know exactly how big of a piece of ground it is around the building, but it's a fairly big, and in our back of the building, there is this little slope in a field. And so for our fall kind of employee event, we had bought a huge, I don't even know how big, but one of those massive screens that inflates, and then they had a DVD player projecting, and we had a food truck, and we had popcorn, and we played Onward, a Pixar film. And I'm like, I want to invite everyone in Dallas that's a Bruce fan and do show this or show Hyde Park and just do our own Bruce outdoor festival.
Well, you know what you should think about seriously, because I did do this. So when I lived in Reading before we moved to Seattle, we were we had a lovely local hotel that actually had a 30-seater private cinema.
Oh yeah.
So I actually did it for family and friends, is that we hired it out. Yeah. And it was actually to celebrate my brother's passing, because my brother was with me at the Hyde Park, and we showed Hyde Park.
Oh, yeah.
But the other thing I've looked at is you'd be surprised how, unless it's changed, but I looked at this when I was in Seattle, get in touch with your local multiplex.
Yes.
and find out how much it costs to hire their smaller cinema. And if you do it like 11 o'clock in the morning, you might be very pleasantly surprised.
That is a great idea. Yeah, to do.
It's. I mean, at the end of the day, we haven't had a tour for 5 years,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
you get to hear Bruce very loud.
Yes. So what, we have a total of, about 13 tracks. So a couple of highlights for you. What are things that you especially enjoyed? And of course, the easy answer is all of it, Jesse. But
I think I would take 3, and I'll do them in reverse order.
Okay.
There you see, I'm going to get close to 4. No, Detroit Melody, which apparently was only played on night 2.
Yeah.
Detroit Melody, I've always loved, and those early days, I had bootlegs, and then when he started touring in the 80s, it was like, they're never going to do Detroit Melody again, are they?
Mm-hmm.
That's the old days, and of course,
good
news is that changed. So I think that's great. You mentioned it before about Clarence, and I know you have a different view on Jungle Land, but I have to say, Clarence just nails that solo. I mean, nails it. I think it's brilliant. The Promised Land, I enjoyed that, not least of which, of course, it has the original opening on it, which he then later dropped. Now, you can see why he dropped it, because he needs two harmonicas.
Yes.
and he almost gets it wrong. But I love that. And then the final one, the very first song he played were in 81 when I saw him for the first time. The opening song was Prove It All Night. And therefore, that will always be special. So those were the ones I particularly enjoyed. It's interesting you mentioned about that, because I was watching with Laura, and Rosalita, she said, "Is this the longest version of Rosalita?" I was sad enough to check. No, it's not. There is a 17.5-minute version I've got. But I think that's him and Clarence camping it up is always a great delight. So most of it basically, Jesse.
Yes, I agree. I've joked about I'm not a fan necessarily of night songs. I don't necessarily like light and other things, but I was pleasantly surprised how much I loved Prove It All Night. Just them coming out and them starting. I really enjoyed it. I did enjoy Jungle Land. I think seeing Clarence in all his glory, was a little sentimental for me.
Yeah.
I think I've told you the story. When I was in Nashville, a kid, had a sign says, "It's my 19th birthday, play the river." And Bruce did play the river. And we joked, had he ever heard the song? I mean, is that really a song you want to celebrate your birthday?
Presumably he got a union card and a wedding coat.
Yes, exactly. I really, in context, going, very few people have heard The River and Sherry Darling. And to think about that, they're getting a new song that is now, both of them, I think, classics. It is interesting. I just love Sherry Darling. I always do. It's just a joy. And to see that young crew doing it. And then Linda and I went to New Orleans a couple of months ago, and this was one of those where if you tried to do logic, you would tilt your head and go, that makes no sense. But James Taylor and Jackson Browne were touring, and the tickets in Fort Worth, which is, right next to Dallas, were just really expensive. They had there was nothing that wasn't, $300-$400 a seat. And so I looked, and New Orleans had tickets still at, the $90-$100 range for pretty good seats. So we spent $3,000 going to New Orleans, flying, hotel room, eating out to save, because we didn't want to pay.
You got cheap tickets. That's okay.
And as Linda said, but we got a mini vacation out of it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it was a lot of fun. But my only regret was because I'd never seen Jackson Browne perform before, and he opened. He was absolutely amazing. James Taylor joined him for a couple of songs, then he changed. But because he's opening, not closing, he didn't do Stay or the Loadout. And that was my only nitpick. I just, because James Taylor closed and ended with Close Your Eyes. And so it was absolutely beautiful. It was but that was my thing. So hearing them do Stay, because I love Running on Empty, and I remember just loving that, Loadout. That made me smile. I've never seen Detroit Medley live, and so seeing all of this in its glory is just amazing. So I agree with you. Those are just really good. But there is not a song that on this set that if I'm got it in the car, on the CD, or on my iPod, my phone, I would just push play. I don't think there's a song like, well, I'll skip this one. I think it really is a very tight 90 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you say that, I guess, because two other things that popped for me. One was, in some ways, this reminded me, albeit obviously, this isn't much longer, but it reminded me of the Super Bowl set.
Yes.
And I'm not going to claim this is mine. I'm not this clever. This was actually in that Times review, but they described it, and I love this, is an all killer, no filler experience.
Yes.
And that's what it is. It's 90 minutes. And as you say, if Bruce was to come out and do a 90-minute show of this quality next year, we'd all still moan. But, it's, he's proven a point. And again, going back, you mentioned about the river, it was premiered at these shows. And I just think, as was Sherry Darling, but the bravery of going out, clearly putting together a hits show, but then, I'll just put two songs in the middle of it that no one's ever heard before.
Yeah, because
at Madison Square Gardens.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. I think that's brilliant.
Yes, it is very much. Because, and you could see, it also is interesting seeing how young the band is. By the way, I just did the math real quickly in my house. 2 of the 13 songs were new, so that's 15%. That's a kind of high percentage. It was really cool that we got, we get to see Tom Petty and Jackson Browne and everything doing Stay. You wonder, nowadays maybe they would have stayed on stage to do either Quarter 3 or Detroit Medley, one or the other. The band was doing their own. I thought it also was fairly seamless, even though you could tell by Clarence's clothes and Bruce's clothes. And
they weren't slick enough to wear the same clothes twice in those days. Nobody had thought of that.
But you very quickly, I didn't notice. I mean, I guess if as far as I'm just enjoying the show, and I think you could have said though. Also, the guys on None But the Brave did mention there was a couple of scenes where, the camera's like looking at the floor.
Yeah.
But they had to throw that in there to get the sound right. And I did, because they had mentioned that, I noticed it and I went, oh,
yeah,
okay,
there is. It actually
funny.
says on the sleeve that there's a couple of bits where they've I forget what they refer to it, but basically they mean bootlegs. They've had to cut in audio because they didn't have the whole thing, which was also in the download. But I mean, apparently, and I didn't have time to search on this, but apparently on night 1, I remember reading this, was that, and it was maybe one of the reasons why Bruce was so sort of edgy, but there'd been some falling out with a girlfriend who was then there as a photographer. And I mean, the other thing that occurred to me was, and I know he's being funny, but Can you imagine him now if someone gave him a birthday cake, just throwing it away?
That was exactly what I was going to bring up, Terry.
I think Mr. Showman now quite rightly would go, fans made the effort, but so he clearly wasn't in the best of moods, I think.
Yes,
but
he was.
Again,
it was, I don't know how much it was really bothering him, the idea of turning 30, but yes, the current Bruce, even 10 or 15
would have called
years
for
ago,
a knife.
yes, would have just been so a little bit of cockiness and arrogance. I mean, and that's youth, right?
Absolutely.
Youth. I did love the kind of James Brown impersonation of him, being down, and they're giving him air. And it is kind of, he doesn't do any introductions, but they do have the whole, I've been asked by this, the management.
His little
is just hilarious. Chris brought up, because he watched part of it with me, he says, well, he has a jacket now, then often he wears a vest. So I guess he decides that, the vest is more comfortable. I said, maybe so. I also love, one of my favorite covers is the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band doing Rave On. And so Bruce does a great version of Rave On this. And I think it was very appropriate that it kind of playing over the credits, and just a really fun set list.
Yeah, I mean that is weird, that one, because here's the nerd. I love my nerdy facts.
Yeah.
If you go on to Setlist FM, which is normally pretty good, Rave On is not shown on the set list on either night.
Oh, wow.
So I don't know if there's a story there, or just whoever put up Setlist forgot or left. Did they come back and do another encore?
I don't know.
Because and I haven't gone back and watched it. If you look, he's talking to someone at the front and then they go into Rave On. So, and it seems strange that they played it over the credits, unless maybe they only had a little snap. But
maybe they do.
Might dig into that one.
I also thought it was very interesting when he was promoting this. He talked about, and he said this a couple of times, worried about getting in his own head, that if he had filmed that, and that's why there's no film, because he was worried that if he saw himself, he might become self-conscious about what he's doing. And I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it, when you look back and think, and I've certainly have read those things of almost worried that it might destroy the magic.
Yes.
And I say this a lot on Music Talks, because a number of guests are younger than me. And one of the things is, the impact of MTV, whereas I was passionately against video when people started doing pop videos. It was like, no, it's my job to put the film in my head. I don't want somebody else giving me a view.
Yes.
Now, you could also argue that, I mean, the video for Atlantic City, I think, was a work of genius.
Yes, it was.
The video for Dancing in the Dark clearly is still one of the most embarrassing things ever been done. And you can see why Bruce was going, I'm not sure this suits me.
Yes.
But and yet I was thinking the number of films that have, so you've got the Hammersmith Odeon show 75 was obviously filmed. You've got the Riveter film in 80, and there's more of those. So there was filming going on, but I understand I don't want to start analyzing what I'm doing.
Yeah, and I think it's really, and it's also early in his career, and not even that early, but for the longest time, signs bothered him, right? He didn't want signs, and and now then he's actually embraced the signs, and especially during some of the Wrecking Ball and High Hopes, where okay, let me pull up and let's see, kind of playing Stump the Band. And I think that's same thing right now. Then they record a lot of stuff, and where they
again, if we get a turn next year, it'll be very interesting to see. I mean,
yeah
you've got to assume that you'll be able to download the shows, but will they
yeah
start releasing videos of them? I mean,
yeah.
they've done official video clips before. Why wouldn't they just stream the whole show?
Well, I mean, I know there would have been shows like as we do, like we buy the audio. There would be plenty of times that I would be glad to, oh yeah, let me take my $25 or whatever you're going to charge me to have a chance to write, to have a video of this show that I adored.
Well, particularly, and I mean, obviously, they are not officially sanctioned.
Yeah,
But the people who are out there doing bootleg videos, the great
yeah,
thing with the download shows now is that the video may not be studio quality, but it's good enough, and then the audio is you use the official audio.
yeah,
And I do have gifted to me clearly
yeah,
copies of shows in Barcelona, for instance, that were special and stuff. So
yeah.
hey, who knows? But
Mhm.
I'm glad they recorded this one.
Yeah, and we usually talk about, when we're discussing this, we'll say, is there any lowlights? Is there anything that weren't? And I think in this case, I can't say there is. I
All
think
filler,
this,
no filler.
yeah, exactly. I mean, it is. It's very, very good. Um, so I want to talk. There is a couple of people on Twitter, and one especially that keeps crying for tracks two, and
Mm.
is saying, Bruce promised us a lot of surprises this year, and he's let us down. And I got to thinking, let's you and I, we're recording this in December. I, this has been a hell of a year of Springsteen. We've got the President Obama and him, podcast and
Yeah,
books.
the book.
Yeah. He did, we talked about the Mellencamp, the Killers.
Yep.
He sang at inauguration. He sang at the memorial for everyone in COVID. He sang at the 9/11 memorial. He's done a couple of appearances in the Jersey area, filling in, right? And we got, we did a Super Bowl commercial. He got arrested, but that worked out okay for him. Went back to Broadway,
Yep.
and this release of this historical document and a hell of a fun show. You tell me, Terry, in I guess like 93, 94, the middle 90s, Terry, would you have loved this kind of year when it
Oh
was
yeah, I
the
mean that is
darkness, right?
well. What people forget is, I mean, no, pun intended, I guess. He did used to go dark for a year or two.
Yeah.
So you think between they did the River Tour that finished mid-81. Nebraska came out about a year later with no tour. Then it was another 2 years to Born in the USA. So yeah, I think that is a very smart reflection, and
Yeah.
also let's not lose sight of the fact that this artist is now 72.
Yes.
I wonder if I don't know who you're talking about, the person on Twitter
Yeah.
will be working that hard when they're 72.
Yes, exactly.
And in terms of tracks two, I guess my view is I would be blown away if track two was to come out and there was stuff that you sat there and thought, oh my God, there is the polished diamond we didn't know about. But I think that's highly unlikely. I'm sure there's stuff in the vaults that will be interesting.
Yes.
But I was actually thinking when I was looking at the River box set the other day, just prepping for this, of when was the last time I went back and listened to The Ties That Bind as a single album? I think I listened to it twice when I got the box set. That was it.
Yes.
So we're not short of Bruce stuff to listen to.
Well, and I think that's a really good point, right? That the he's already gone to the vaults once and has released and shared It does feel like that he is not recording 30 songs anymore for 12. I think he has been a little more selective. So I'm sure there's a few outtakes that will be interesting. But yeah, I agree with you. I of course am a completist like you. I want anything he's recorded. I'd love to see. There is still that rumor, right? There's a whole album he recorded that he never released that he's thinking about. I'd love to hear that. But I agree with you. I think it'll be fun. I think it'll be interesting, but I don't think it will have the impact that the original tracks did. As little Steven says, how did these things not make an album?
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's, I guess my view would be if I've got a choice between getting two messages, one is Bruce is doing tracks 2, or Bruce is recording a new album, I'd much rather have the second one.
Oh, absolutely. I agree.
But hey, let's see, if he produces something, as you say, we will buy it and we will listen to it. And
absolutely,
it will be interesting, but it's not going to be a life-changing experience, I suspect.
No. And when it happens, my hope is you will join me so that we can discuss. Yes.
I would just going back to the No Nukes, and again, this is from, it's actually from the Pitchfork review.
Yes.
But this resonated for me. So it's talks about the way the set is paced, and then it finishes on old hits, and it says the Bruce and the E Street Band were by then amassing a deep catalogue, but they remained connected with their audiences through the common vernacular of old hits. Those familiar choruses and hooks are war horses, but the E Street Band uses them as a vehicle for transcendence. Years of similar performances haven't diminished the power of this one. It has a distinctive blend of magic and might. It's the sound of a band who knows they've hit their stride and still gets giddy at the noise they make. And then its final comment, I love this. It's a bar band delivering communion.
I love that.
On a Sunday, particularly, that feels appropriate.
Very appropriate. So as I said, Chris watched a little bit of this with me, and he, when you say all due respect, right, you are not being respectful, but he does mean this in a respectful way. He's hearing Detroit Medley and he goes, why is he still doing Shout when he could do Detroit Medley, Dad? I'm like, I don't know. He loves Shout for some reason. I don't get it. Yeah. And he's like, you would think he'd break it up. And and then quarter to 3. And I do think, once again, as if you and I were giving him advice, not that he needs it, as Laura has told us both, right? Hey, maybe mix it up, like do quarter 3, Detroit Medley, Shout, just keep it fresh a little.
I think that would be, if Bruce was to ask me, that would be my one thing that says, let's go back to the days where the encores were a surprise.
Yes.
But hey.
Yeah.
He's clearly not going to ask me, and
he's not asking me either.
He's not done too badly without our advice.
Absolutely, yeah, he's done okay. Yes, him and Mr. Landau seem to be doing pretty well.
Yeah.
Terry, as always, I love visiting with you. This is so great. What do you got coming up in Music Talks?
So I've done my last episode of the normal format for the year. Okay. And that went out last Thursday. And then I've recorded with my friend and yours, Stephen Routledge, as I have for the last 3 years. So we've done our top 10 albums. So we each choose our 10 albums. And we've because our tastes are very different. So this year there was only one. There was one choice on Stephen's list that would have made mine. There were none on mine that would have made his. There were actually only 3 on his that I recognized, let alone had heard. Mm-hmm. And we've basically come up with these names where I am Top 40 Terry, and he is Bandcamp Boy. So to give you some, and this is not boasting about the audience figures for Music Talks. But 3 of Stephen's choices actually get less downloads on Spotify than Music Talks do. And I have to say, one of those 3 it's his #1 album of the year. It's a guy who lives between him and me. He's a music teacher, and it's brilliant. It's a guy called Andrew Howie. But those episodes come out on the 16th of December. So we both count down from 10 to 5, and there's a little clip from each of our choices. And then the final episode comes out on 30th of December, where we go from 5 to 1. So if people are in that, I never get to hear new music, you might find something in there that appeals to you.
And I ask, hopefully, in 2022, you will start up again with your normal format.
We'll be back in, I think, on, what would it be? Let me think. It will be the 15th of January. And I continue to post every 2 weeks. And I'm glad to say I've got a really strong list of people who want to be on the show. And I'm really pleased that I have a number of women in there.
Good.
So my diversity is getting better, which is something I wanted to happen. So that's good.
I absolutely do. And I will continue to send people I think that will
Please
be good
do.
guests, because it's always interesting. And it is such a joy. I continue to love the format. You have ended up creating a way to give a biography of someone, and whether they know it or not, the soundtrack of their lives. Right.
Yep.
And it's just always a joy to hear the diversity and the different kind of music that means to people. And as we talked about, right, you got to love someone who does a last minute audible and says, well, instead of Thunder Road, I'm going to do Alvin and the Chipmunks.
So just in case people don't know, that was a guest called Yishun Lai, who was also a guest on Setlist in Bruce.
Yes.
And I loved the fact, as you said, it was an audible when it's obviously Springsteen that was involved. And it was one of those moments that I think are good for the soul, where I sat there and I thought, do you know what? This show is about the guests deciding what music they want to choose, not you deciding for the guest what they should.
Exactly. So, yes.
And a great story. And Yishun, in fairness, has now put me in touch with one of her friends has reached out to say, I'd love to be on the show. So thank you, Jesse. And but I will continue to do one every 2 weeks, as opposed to, as we said before you press record, it feels like you're doing about 3 or 4 a week at the moment. But I know that's going to hopefully get down to.
Yes, I am hoping to slow down a little bit. I did talk about, I was sharing with Terry, because coming up, I have a Michael Elliott, who has written a book on John Hyatt, who is someone you and I both love.
Yep.
And so he also turns out to be a massive Springsteen fan. So he's going to return, and we're going to do a Springsteen themed episode as well. But I am now going to, and Terry has agreed to join me. I'm asking for people who either know John Hyatt and love him, or want to learn about a wonderful musician, to pick an album, listen to it, and then join me to discuss. So I'm hoping I can get some rookie Hyatt, they are normally, love music, but you've just never explored his catalog, to kind of pick an album and kind of listen, and then we could discuss it. So I think that will be a lot of fun. That's one of my plans for 2022.
That would be great. And talking of plans, the final thing about No Nukes that I forgot to mention, I have Saturday night to myself next week. Laura's off out with the family. So what I'm planning to do is actually play the No Nukes concert, followed by the Letter to You film.
Oh, that will be very interesting.
And I think doing the 2 back-to-back could be quite fun.
I think that could be a lot of fun. I agree. Now then, I want to go do that. Terry, I hope you and your family, Laura, have a wonderful holiday season.
Thank you.
It is, there are many blessings doing this podcast, and definitely among the top is the friendships I have made with people online, and you definitely are the top, one of the tops on that list, Terry.
Well, the feeling's mutual, Jesse, and
yes.
I thank you as always, and have a great holiday.
Well, thank you. And I did love when on Facebook someone posted, "Where did you want to see Bruce perform live?" And I said Scotland, so that I could hang out with you. And you said great, and then we would fly to Spain together to watch
To
him.
Milan. Well,
Yeah.
here's the thing, and I mean this nicely.
Yeah.
I'm actually getting, if there is a turn next year, I am now thinking that I'm probably going to be at the San Siro with about 25 people that I've invited.
Wow, that's great.
Well, if they all turned up, it would.
Yeah.
And I do again mean it as a positive, because one of the difference between Brits and Americans is if you say to a Brit, "Oh, you must come and see me sometime," you don't really mean it. It's like, wouldn't it? It's like, whereas we learned many, many years ago that if you say it to an American, they're likely to turn up.
Yes, they are.
Which I think is a good thing. So if all of those people, including yourself, turn up the San Siro, then that would be fantastic.
That sounds
Thank you,
amazing.
Jesse.
Thank you, Terry.
Right.
Listeners, be safe. Go get vaccinated. Go get your booster. I just got mine this week.
Me too.
And take care of yourselves. Terry, happy holidays. And listeners, the same to you. We will talk to you soon. Goodbye.
Bye.
Doing a podcast at times can be a one-way conversation, and I hate that. So please let me know what you like and don't like about the work I'm doing. You can reach the podcast via email at setlistingbruce@gmail.com. The show is on Twitter at setlistingbruce, and my personal Twitter is at jessejacksondfw. We have a website, www.setlistingbruce.com. From there, you can find links to other Springsteen podcasts as well as other music-themed podcasts. We have a page devoted to our own SLB All-Star Band. These are guests who have been on the podcast more than 3 times. There is a link to our store where you can purchase Set Listing Bruce shirts as well as a Merry Question t-shirt. There is a link to our Patreon page where you can sign up to help support the podcast financially. We have different levels and different rewards based on your support. If you don't have any extra cash, and right now, who does? You can support the podcast by subscribing via your favorite podcast player and leaving us a review. The more reviews we have, the easier it is for people to find us. And please tell a friend about the podcast, especially if they love Bruce or music, because it will make a difference. You just heard the fun-talking, hard-rocking, music-loving, album-ranking, fan-thinking, joy-spreading, lyric-reading, story-sharing podcast that is the one, the only, Set Listing Bruce. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.